Okay, so in the last episode, we added this giant, amazing fire smoke churny flipbook. And this is really the point when the effect started to feel good, right? If I play the aim again, we've got a pretty rewarding explosion that looks pretty good. In this episode, what I want to do is add on top of that. This is kind of where we just start throwing things into it to see what works. And I think that a big piece of what's missing from an explosion is some rock chunks, some dirt, some debris, things like that. This is a pretty good opportunity for us to learn about making a different type of particle component. Remember way back in an earlier episode, I was describing that the particles are points in space simulating, and we can choose what to attach to them. So far, we've only done sprites. We've only attached sprites, those quads that are camera facing or velocity lines, to those individual points. Now we get to actually put geometry on it. So one of the files that we've provided, this is the last file that we haven't used yet, is just called sm_rock. This is an FBX file. It's a 3D object. It's just a model, like a low poly model of a rock, actually, that we modeled. And an FBX file is kind of a universal standard of 3D object format that can be exported from Blender, Maya, really most 3D tools at this point can export FBXs. So we're going to go ahead and import this.
And as a reminder, guys, everything here that you can see, these downloadable assets, you can find that link to download these in the description below. We're providing those so that you guys can download along.
This is also the only asset that we're providing that I'm not going to teach you how to make. If you want to, you can go model a rock. We'll spare you at least that one. Once again, I can just hit import or I can drag and drop. This time what's going to happen is this big old import options window is going to pop up. There's a lot of stuff in here. And that's because what I said earlier about FBX being sort of a universal standard. There's a lot of different tools that can export FBXs in all kinds of different settings. One of the common ones that screws up everybody is that Maya is a Y-up coordinate system and Unreal is a Z-up coordinate system. And so your object might come in sideways. We are, for simplicity, just going to ignore all of this, leave it all at defaults, and hit import.
I guess in our case, it's a rock, so it's maybe not
the
most important.
Yeah. We're going to spin it randomly anyway. Right. So we did get that warning about smoothing groups. Again, for the sake of this, it doesn't matter. What happened is it created a material for me, which is nice and handy, and then I have my rock. If I double click it, then I get the 3D viewport scene, and I can move around my rock. It's very pretty, right? That material, we didn't import any textures or anything, so it's just got a default gray color. You can see that it is the full opaque and surface material type or shader type, and so these parameters we're maybe not as familiar with, and the subcolor is still there. But we're just going to leave it on base color because we do want this to be lit, and so the base color plug is what's going into the lighting model so it can receive shadows and things like that. I will, however, change this color. Julian, in all of our sprite materials, we were using a specific node to be able to pass data from Niagara into a shader. Do you remember what that was?
It was particle something. Particle
color.
Particle color. I got half of it.
Yeah. We're just going to plug that in instead. So once again, I could put textures in here. I could go ham and make this rock beautiful. For what we're doing, I'm just going to color it a little bit brown, and I'm going to make sure that in Niagara, I have the ability to give it a little bit of color variation, which is why I'm connecting it that way. I'm going to hit apply. Unreal by default is outputting white, which is why this is just a solid white square. So that's working. I'm going to save this as well, and I'm going to go ahead and close these. Now, we have an explosion. We've got a lot of emitters that are already maybe decent templates for us to start with. I think in this case, the rocks are going to roughly follow the same expansion concept as our embers.
Sure.
So they're going to fall instead of rise. We'll make some changes, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy them over here and paste. This is Control-C and Control-V. I'm going to rename this rocks. And then the very first thing I'm going to do is just delete my sprite render. It's gone. Instead, I'm going to click plus and choose a mesh renderer. Now on the mesh renderer, we get a bunch of different options that are relevant to meshes. One that always confuses me, and I swear every single time I hop in here, I stare around this for like 10 minutes before I remember I can expand this. And that's where I plug in my mesh. I can drag and drop. I can browse to it. I can click it and sign just like everything else. And now I've got these. That got fun. There we go. So I'm previewing only this emitter now so we can look at it. We have turbulent floating rocks. Let's remove a couple of things here. I'm going to get rid of the drag. I'm going to get rid of the acceleration force, or I'll keep that. We could add a gravity force, or we could just set this one to be gravity. I'm going to definitely get rid of the curl noise. Let's go ahead and set this to be gravity. Let's do not a random range. Gravity is pretty consistent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I will actually just hit the reset button. And then gravity in Unreal is, actually gravity in the world is negative 9.8 meters per second. Unreal is centimeters, and so negative 980. And now they fall. There's some fun things we can do here right off the bat. There's a lot of things that we would ordinarily do anyway, and we will. But I think the first thing I'm going to do is just add collision, because I think it's an important, tricky one. So if we click on particle update and type in collision, collision is absolutely one of those properties where if you aren't careful, you can just tank your frame rate. Collisions can be really, really expensive. I pretty much always still use collisions on a few particles. What I typically do is just set it on a few bigger particles, because those are the ones your eyes will follow. And then we would have maybe another emitter spawning more rocks that aren't colliding. And you hopefully won't notice that, say, some of the smaller ones are just falling through. For the sake of this demo, let's just leave it and go ham here. So we've got a ton of particles. It automatically is working, right? And it's working pretty well, just bouncing off of everything. We can fix a couple things though. So I'm going to turn on control roll on collide to see if we can actually get some 3D rolling. Right off the bat, that makes things a little bit more natural. They're maybe too fast. And that's because the radius calculation is based off of a sprite. We can make this more expensive and actually try to have it based off of our mesh's geometry. So if I do that, I get this bounds input for mesh dimensions. And the flyout tells me how to actually find what those bounds should be. What it says is the number of centimeters, blah, blah, blah. This value can be found within the static mesh editor on the left-hand side of the viewport under the label approximate size. That is such a handy tip. Let's go look at that. Over here, the approximate size, it says is 35 by 41 by 32. Let's go plug that in. What did I say, 35 by 41 by 32? 32? All right. And as soon as I input that, you can see that the collisions start to feel a lot more natural in those rolls. Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Now let's go ahead and do all of the same things that we always do to make this feel like a better particle effect. First of all, let's get some size variation going in this. So our particle state, our initialized particle still has a property down here for size, but it's mesh attributes now instead of sprite size. You can see it's unset. So we're going to do a random non-uniform just to get the most variations possible. These are multipliers of the size that this was built in the 3D file. So you can see that like 1 and 2 is quite large. So let's try 0.1, 0.1, and 0.5. We're getting a little bit too much random variation between these. I'm going to go ahead and just set them to random uniform, just for the sake of simplicity.
So they're proportional. Yeah, dimensions are the same.
Yeah, I mean, we could find a way to control it and still have more randoms and keep that safe, but I'd rather just not bore you guys too much. And then press G for game mode, and then I'm going to turn off isolate so we can see it in context. Aside from our colors, that's starting to feel pretty badass and explosive, right? What type of color changes do you want to put on these?
I think if we're going for something with rocks, we need like a brown, maybe some reddish orange hues.
Right. So because we copied this from our embers, we still got those fire controls. Let's go ahead and just reset the entire thing. I'm going to go back to direct set, and I'm going to pick just a white first so we can see it just white default. Oh, and then we also have our scale color happening. I'm going to turn that off for now. So I just toggle it off. So that's our gray default particle mesh. Now I can go in and alter the colors and sort of see this update and pick some that I like. So I'm just going to kind of poke around a little bit. It seems like in the orange and red feels pretty good. I'm going to use random range direct set, and I'm just going to pick 2 colors that I like. For the minimum, I'll go a little bit dark, but maybe I'll do a brown over here.
Is there a reason you're not going with a more saturated color?
No,
I'm going to
Great.
kind of stick
Great.
to. Okay.
do you want actually? You're helping me here. What color should we use?
I
Mr.?
tend to like pretty hyper saturated.
Okay.
Like I think the brown is good. I just like a little bit more juice in the colors.
All right, let's do it.
Personal preference.
Let's go pure saturation for mustard, apparently. And all right, so there's what we have at the moment. It's art directly.
Looks a little bit like candy corn.
Yeah. I am gonna dial this back a little bit because nature tends to not be that saturated.
Yeah. I think maybe something more in the brown, like getting us a little bit more into the brown territory. Yeah, there we go. That's looking.
Yeah, we still have a little bit of, I don't know, we're blowing up red bricks apparently off of our blue. Actually, that's true. They're blue cubes.
They're
Maybe
blue
we
cubes,
should,
yeah,
should we use some blue?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay,
That makes
all right.
sense.
I'm gonna come over here. I feel like our explosion needs to be hued a little bit more blue for this to make sense, but I think we're just flying off the rails here. I'm gonna, for the sake of a good grenade explosion, not tied to its source, which motivation is really important, so I feel bad doing this, but I'm gonna leave us on the warmer,
nice.
natural tone.
It's nice being able to see though that we could kind of see where we could tie it to certain materials in the real world in the game. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I'm gonna dial back the warmth of that a tiny bit. Okay. How do you feel about this right now?
It's looking pretty good. I like the look of it. Yeah.
What do we need to do to actually see this properly to like understand how it's gonna feel?
We probably want to go in game, right?
Yeah, always look in context. Viewports don't matter, man, because the player is gonna actually play the game.
And they feel pretty large.
It's pretty rewarding.
It looks great. They
They're
feel a little large.
Yeah, they're large.
Maybe a lot of them.
It's pretty excessive.
Yeah.
It is admittedly very fun right now. Again, our effect is looping too, which kind of adds to the chaos and pandemonium.
Yeah.
One pretty obvious bug, if you're actually watching this though, is, or maybe not bug, but problem is we're not doing anything to fade these out, right? They die and they just pop away.
Right.
The problem with with something just disappearing is it also draws the eye.
Right.
But then it's a little bit frustrating because your eye is drawn to what just changed, but it's already gone. And so it's a very frustrating thing for players to like see pops, but then go to look at it and it's not there anymore. And it's very distracting and pulls everybody out. So we need to find a way to really kill these individual mesh particles elegantly. This is a bit of a conundrum because this mesh is not transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, we left it in the default opaque mode, and so we cannot fade it out. And so we're kind of limited on the ways that we can make this disappear. There's not actually a good solution to this, but this is why in a lot of games, and it's the solution that we're about to implement, we just scale it down. That also looks very alien because, hey, why the hell are rocks actually scaling down? The best path forward to do this is actually to make them disappear when they're off camera. That's a pretty complex setup, but what you can do is just make it so that they stay there until you look up, and then you look back down and they're gone. We're trying to go for the least bad option. That's certainly not ideal still, but... So for now, for simplicity, let's just go ahead and scale them down. So if I come over here and do mesh size, scale mesh size, and I'm gonna give myself a curve, vector from curve. Here, this might actually be the first time I've done a mathematical three vector from a curve, but so you can actually see that I've got a separate curve for the X, Y, and the Z based on those colors. I'm lucky right now that they're all just kind of set for me, but you can notice that it's starting off at a size of 1 and then just scaling down. That actually doesn't bother me that much, except it's just made them a lot less impactful. Okay, let me hit G again. So what do you think? Do you like them just scaling down over their whole lifespan, or do we want to maybe try to move this over?
Yeah, kind of like or maybe I guess maybe it's a little bit weird in the context of that they're supposed to be rocks, but I kind of like that little like bump in size before they came down that we had applied previously to our embers.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that would look weird, but
you're gonna challenge me to manipulate this graph. Okay. So it's a little bit tedious because you have to
do it for all three.
There's probably a shortcut to do this individually, but
if you guys know the shortcut, comment below. Let us know.
So I'm just going to grab these handles upwards on each of them. All right, and then I'm going to turn them all on. I got pretty close. I think it's
kind of cool.
Okay. You'd also commented that there were too many of them. We definitely don't have a random variation right now. If you go back to the spawn burst, we do. We're spawning 50 to 80. Do you want to do less?
I think so. Maybe,
Okay.
Can we do like 20 to 40?
Yeah. We can do whatever you want, Julian.
There's the power.
There's 20 to 40.
It's a little bit better.
Yeah. Let's try it in game.
I did notice one other thing, but
Yeah.
I'll wait till we... It's feeling better. It doesn't feel like it's this
I agree.
catastrophically large number of...
But those rocks did add something to this explosion. It feels like there's a little more chaos and power to it.
So maybe
Something
we go 30 to 50.
Sure. 30 to 50. Now, you were going to comment on
Yeah,
something
the
else.
thing I wanted to check too is the sort of like rotation when they spawn, because I noticed like
Oh, it feels uniform?
before we started playing around with the like sort of collision physics, they were just uniform. Their rotation was uniform. So I think it'd be cool to have them kind of spit out at random rotations.
Yeah.
Just to like, I mean, we're not seeing it as much now that we've sort of manipulated the parameters, just for the sake of like paying attention to detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, we want to add, just like with sprites, we want to have them born with a random rotation as well. One thing to note is that on sprites, there's just a random rotation on the initialized particle. On meshes, we need to add an extra module. And so we're going to search for mesh rotation. Actually, it's initial mesh orientation is what we want to go with. And by default, it's set to random, which is pretty handy. But as always, you've got all kinds of controls. And that should have given us a random rotation. Now, I'd said earlier that collisions can be a little bit expensive, and so usually what we would do is have them only on the hero pieces. That's how I typically refer to like the bigger ones that the average person's eye is going to follow. That way they see it and they see it bounce and everybody's happy. And then if we wanted to really fill this in, we could simply duplicate that emitter and go with, we'll call this rocks small. Turn off collisions on this one. I'm just doing by deleting. And then over here, we can actually crank up the numbers. And so let's go a bit ludicrous.
Do we want to change the size of the smaller?
Yeah, probably. But what I wanted to show you is that, like, amongst the chaos, you can't really tell, like, because we have some colliding,
Yeah.
it doesn't really feel that bad that there's also some that don't, right? It's kind of already tricking the eye. So if we did go back and also make these smaller, let's do like maybe 0.1 to, so 0.03 to 0.1. Really fill that in with some noise. You totally can't. I mean, I think we might have gone a little bit too small because I'm not really seeing them that much. But, and actually, before I get an engineer or anybody with a sense of performance and optimization yelling at me, I'm going to come back over here and we're going to turn this down to like maybe 100 by 120.
Fair enough.
All right. The point here is that doing that trick of making the bigger, more obvious things for you to see, the higher fidelity, we can get away with cheating a lot of other things. Now, those smaller particles, there's really no reason for me to have them even be meshes at this point. And so I could also just take a picture of a rock and put them back on sprites, and that's also much cheaper and faster to simulate. And so that's what I would absolutely do. I'd have the bigger one that is colliding is going to be a mesh that could rotate and get me those cool 3D bounces. And then all of the smaller ones that aren't colliding, they're just going to be single sprites.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I can fill that in. Okay, there's one last thing that I want to do to this explosion, but I think we're going to go ahead and call that part of the next episode. So here in this episode, what we've done is explored actually using a 3D mesh, brought in from another tool as an FBX file, imported and hooked up to follow our particle simulations as a mesh component, allowing us the ability to have full 3D collisions and rotations and lighting and simulations.
Yeah, and if you guys are really enjoying this content, if you're learning along with us, please subscribe to the channel. You can also follow us on social. All those links are in the description below. Also on our website, beyondfx.com. We are constantly posting new educational resources. We have short form tips. We have medium form tutorials. So check that stuff out, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.